My name is Liam Mitchell. I'm 26 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was a wildlife photographer based in Columbus, Ohio. I say was because I don't know if I'll ever pick up a camera again after what happened near Blackwood Bridge. I'm writing this account not to convince anyone, I hardly believe it myself, but because my therapist thinks documenting the experience might help me process it. Maybe it will, or maybe putting these words on paper will only make the nightmares worse. It started in late October last year. I'd been commissioned by an environmental magazine to photograph the autumn scenery around rural Ohio, specifically focusing on the lesser-known natural areas. My research led me to Ravenswood County, a sparsely populated region with dense forests and abandoned historical sites, perfect for the moody atmospheric shots the magazine wanted. I arrived in the small town of Millfield on October 28th. It was immediately clear this wasn't a tourist destination. The town consisted of a main street with a diner, a gas station, a small motel, and a handful of other businesses. Most of the storefronts were empty, windows papered over. I checked into the Millfield Inn, a 2-story motel that had seen better days, and asked the elderly desk clerk about hiking trails and interesting landmarks. "You'll want to stay on the marked paths," she said, not looking up from her crossword puzzle, especially with hunting season coming up. "Any specific areas you'd recommend for photography?" I asked. She hesitated, finally meeting my eyes. "Blackwood Forest has some nice views, but don't go near that old bridge after dark." I smiled, assuming this was small-town superstition. "Ghost stories?" "Something like that." She slid my room key across the counter. "Room 7, checkouts at 11. That night I reviewed maps of the area and planned my first excursion to Blackwood Forest. I found mentions online of an abandoned railroad bridge, likely the one the clerk had referenced, that spanned a deep ravine. It had been out of use for decades and was now something of a local landmark. Perfect for my shoot. The next morning was crisp and clear, ideal for photography. I packed my equipment, some water and energy bars, and drove out to the forest trailhead. The woods were beautiful, maple and oak trees blazing with red and gold, the forest floor carpeted with fallen leaves. I spent hours taking photos, making my way deeper into the woods. By mid-afternoon, I found myself approaching the ravine. Through the trees, I could see the rusted metal of the bridge. It was more impressive than I'd expected. A massive iron trestle bridge spanning a gorge about 60 feet deep, with a creek running below. The structure was weathered, partially overgrown with vines, but still intact. I carefully made my way closer, looking for the best angles to capture it. As I photographed the bridge from various perspectives, I noticed something odd. Claw marks on some of the trees near the ravine. They were too large to be from a bear and too high up the trunk. Probably vandalism, I thought, though they looked remarkably authentic. The sun was beginning to set when I decided to head back. That's when I heard it, a low guttural sound that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite human. I froze, my camera halfway to my bag. The sound came again, closer this time. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing but the distant gurgle of the creek below the bridge. I quickened my pace back toward the trail, constantly looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Twice I thought I saw movement between the trees, something large moving on all fours but too tall to be a normal predator. The light was fading fast, and in the growing shadows my imagination was getting the better of me. I was about halfway back to the trailhead when I heard the unmistakable sound of branches snapping behind me. I broke into a run, no longer caring about the equipment banging against my back. Behind me, the noises grew louder. Something was following me, and it was fast. I reached my car just as darkness fell, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As I pulled away from the trailhead, my headlights swept across the tree line. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing at the edge of the forest. A massive, hunched figure, too tall to be human, with glinting eyes that caught the light. Then it was gone, and I was speeding back toward town, convinced I was losing my mind. That night at the motel, I tried to rationalize what had happened. It was hunting season. Maybe I'd nearly encountered a poacher. Or perhaps it was a bear, though I knew bears weren't common in this part of Ohio. I checked my camera, hoping I might have inadvertently captured something, but found nothing unusual in the photos. I considered leaving Millfield the next morning, but the thought of failing to complete my assignment and having to explain why kept me there. Besides, it was broad daylight now, and my fears seemed silly. I decided to explore a different part of the forest, far from the bridge. The second day passed uneventfully. I got some excellent shots of an abandoned farmhouse and a small waterfall. As evening approached, I headed back to town, determined to avoid being in the woods after dark again. At the diner that night, I overheard a conversation between two locals that made me pause. "Another one gone missing up near the old bridge," an older man was saying. "That's 3 this year." "Rangers saying it's another accident?" his companion asked. "What else would they say? Can't exactly put torn apart by something unnatural in an official report." They noticed me listening and fell silent. When I approached their table and introduced myself, explaining I was photographing the area, they became immediately guarded. "You been up to the bridge?" the older man asked. I nodded. "Yesterday. Beautiful spot." The two men exchanged glances. "Best stick to the trails from now on," the second man said. "Lot of sinkholes and such out by that ravine. Dangerous place." I wanted to ask about what they'd been discussing, but their closed expressions told me I wouldn't get straight answers. Instead, I asked if they knew any local history about the bridge. The older man, who introduced himself as Ray, seemed to consider whether to share something. Finally, he said, "Bridge was built in 1912. Train derailed there in 33. Killed a dozen workers from the old Blackwood mill. Some say the place has been cursed ever since." "Cursed how?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Just stories," Ray's friend cut in. "Every small town's got 'em." I thanked them and returned to my table, but the conversation had unsettled me. Later that night, I researched the Blackwood Bridge online. There had indeed been a deadly derailment in 1933. More interestingly, I found several news articles about hikers and campers going missing in the vicinity over the years. The most recent was from just 2 months ago, a college student who'd been camping alone. The official explanation was that he had fallen into the ravine, but his body had never been recovered. Despite my better judgment, I decided I needed to return to the bridge. If nothing else, I wanted daytime photos of the spots where I'd seen the claw marks. I told myself it was professional curiosity, but in truth, I was drawn back by something I couldn't explain. The next day, October 30th, I returned to Blackwood Forest. This time I arrived early and brought extra batteries, water, and a powerful flashlight, just in case. I also carried a hunting knife, which gave me a small sense of security, though I knew it would be useless against a bear or mountain lion. I spent the morning photographing the areas surrounding the bridge, working my way closer to it. The claw marks I'd noticed were still there, and in daylight they were even more disturbing. Deep gouges in the tree bark that no human tool could have made. I photographed them meticulously, using my hand in some shots for scale. The marks were nearly 8 inches long. By noon, I was on the bridge itself. It was sturdy enough, though some of the railroad ties were rotting. I walked carefully to the center, where I had a panoramic view of the ravine and the creek below. It was while taking wide-angle shots that I noticed something in the creek bed, a flash of white that stood out against the dark rocks and fallen leaves. I zoomed in with my camera. It was difficult to make out details from that height, but it looked like bone, possibly animal remains. I needed a closer look. There was a steep path leading down to the creek about 50 yards from the bridge. I followed it carefully, slipping on wet leaves several times. At the bottom of the ravine, the temperature was noticeably colder, and the sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. I made my way along the creek toward the spot I'd seen from above. What I found turned my blood to ice. It wasn't animal remains. It was a human skull, partially buried in the silt of the creek bed. Around it were other bones, a rib cage, a femur, scattered pieces that had once been a person. They were old, covered in algae and sediment, but unmistakably human. I should have called the police immediately. Instead, I took photos, careful not to disturb anything. It was only as I was documenting the scene that I noticed the bones hadn't just been scattered by water or animals. Some of them bore the same kind of marks I'd seen on the trees, deep, parallel gouges as if they'd been clawed or gnawed. The realization of what I was looking at hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, nearly falling into the creek. I needed to get out of there, to contact authorities. I turned to head back up the path, and that's when I saw them. More bones, half buried in the bank of the creek. And these were fresher. I scrambled up the path, no longer caring about anything except getting away from that place. Back on the bridge, I pulled out my phone to call 911, but had no signal. I would have to return to town first. As I hurried back toward the trail, I noticed something I'd missed earlier. A small, tumble-down cabin about 100 yards from the bridge, partially hidden by trees. It hadn't been visible from the main trail, but from the bridge, I could just make out its roof through the canopy. I hesitated. It might have a landline phone, or at least offer shelter while I collected myself. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows broken, door hanging off the hinges. As I approached, I saw it wasn't as old as I'd first thought. The decay seemed to be from neglect rather than age. Inside was a mess. Furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. It looked like someone had left in a hurry, or like the place had been searched. On a table by the window, I found a journal. The last entry was dated just 3 weeks earlier. It's getting closer. Every night now, I can hear it scratching at the walls. The rangers don't believe me. No one believes me. But I've seen what it can do. What it did to Eric. I have to end this. Tonight, I'm going to the bridge with the silver bullets. It ends tonight. The journal was signed Marcus D. My hands were shaking as I put the journal down. This was insane. Silver bullets? Was this Marcus person hunting a werewolf? It was absurd, and yet, those claw marks, the bones, the stories about people going missing. I looked around the cabin more carefully and found newspaper clippings tacked to one wall, all about missing persons cases in the area. Some dated back decades. In a drawer, I found a box of ammunition. The bullets had been filed down and dipped in what looked like silver paint. Beside them was a revolver. I'm not proud of what I did next, but fear makes people do strange things. I took the gun and the silver bullets. Not because I believed in werewolves, I couldn't, but because having a weapon made me feel less helpless. I checked that the gun was loaded and put it in my backpack. By now it was late afternoon. I needed to get back to town before dark. I left the cabin and headed for the trail, moving as quickly as I could without running. The forest seemed different now, threatening, alive with hidden dangers. Every sound made me jump. I was about halfway back to the trailhead when I found the backpack. It was leaning against a tree just off the path, a modern hiking pack, dirty but not weathered. Someone had been here recently. I called out, thinking its owner might be nearby, but got no response. I should have left it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were standard hiking supplies, a water bottle, and a wallet. The ID inside the wallet belonged to Eric Chambers, 22, from Cincinnati. The same Eric mentioned in Marcus's journal. I took the wallet, thinking I would give it to the police along with my story about the bones. The sun was setting as I finally reached my car. I threw my equipment in the back seat and was about to get in when I noticed the scratches. 4 deep gouges in the driver's side door that hadn't been there before. My heart pounding, I got in, locked the doors, and sped back toward town. At the Millfield police station, a small building with just 2 officers on duty, I tried to explain what I'd found. The older officer, Sheriff Dalton, listened patiently, but I could tell he didn't believe me. When I mentioned the bones, he sighed. "That area has been searched many times, son. Any human remains would have been found and removed." "But I saw them, photographed them," I insisted, reaching for my camera. He held up a hand. "I'm sure you saw something, probably animal bones. Hunters dump deer carcasses out there all the time." "What about the missing hikers? The journal I found?" Sheriff Dalton's expression hardened. Marcus Decker was a troubled man with a history of mental health issues. We found his body by that bridge 3 weeks ago. Suicide. As for the missing hikers, this is rugged country. People get lost, have accidents. And the scratches on my car? Could have been a bear or vandals. Look, Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate you coming in, but there's nothing criminal to investigate here. I suggest you stick to the main trails if you insist on continuing your photography project. I left the station feeling frustrated and increasingly afraid. They weren't going to help. No one was going to help because no one believed there was anything to fear. I considered leaving Millfield immediately, but it was already dark, and the thought of driving the isolated roads at night was somehow worse than staying in town. Back at the motel, I examined the photos I'd taken. The bones were clearly visible, unmistakably human. I also had clear shots of the claw marks on the trees. I uploaded everything to my laptop and sent copies to my email, just to be safe. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, the ice machine down the hall, cars passing on the road outside, made me tense up. When I did drift off, I dreamed of being chased through endless woods by something I couldn't see but could hear breathing behind me, always just out of sight. I woke before dawn, determined to leave Millfield. I had enough photos for the magazine, and nothing was worth staying in this place any longer. I packed quickly, checked out, and was on the road as the sun was coming up. But as I drove past the turnoff to Blackwood Forest, something made me stop. The gun and silver bullets were still in my backpack. Marcus Decker had died trying to end whatever was happening here. I had evidence now, photos that clearly showed human remains. If I could find more concrete proof, maybe the authorities would have to listen. It was a stupid, irrational decision, but I turned around and drove to the forest trailhead. It was Halloween morning. The forest was quiet, peaceful in the early light. I told myself I would take a few more photos of the bones in better light, document the scene properly, and be gone within a couple of hours. The hike to the bridge seemed shorter this time. Perhaps it was because I knew where I was going, or perhaps it was the grim determination that had replaced my fear. When I reached the ravine, I went straight to the path leading down to the creek. The bones were still there, exactly as I'd left them. In the morning light, they seemed even more obviously human. I took more photos, being careful to include clear reference points so the location couldn't be disputed. As I worked, I became aware of an odd smell, like wet dog combined with something metallic, like blood. I followed the creek bed, finding more scattered remains. Some were ancient, almost fossilized. Others were recent enough that I won't describe them in detail. It's enough to say that people had died here, violently, over a long period of time. Near the base of one of the bridge's support columns, I found a small cave, partially hidden by fallen rocks. The smell was stronger here. I hesitated, then turned on my flashlight and peered inside. The cave was shallow but extended back farther than my light could penetrate. The ground was covered with leaves, dirt, and bones. Many, many bones in various states of decay. This was a lair, a den where something brought its prey. On the walls were more claw marks and what looked like crude drawings, stick figures being hunted by a large, hulking shape. I backed out of the cave, heart hammering in my chest. This was proof, undeniable proof that something had been killing people here for years. I needed to document it all, then get this evidence to someone who would listen. State police, FBI, anyone. I was so focused on taking photos of the cave entrance that I didn't notice the silence until it was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the creek seemed to register anymore. Just complete, unnatural silence. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I spun around, nearly dropping my camera. There was nothing visible, but I could feel it watching me. The hair on my neck stood up. Slowly, I reached into my backpack and wrapped my hand around the revolver. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. In response, something moved in the shadows across the creek. Something large. I caught a glimpse of matted fur, a hunched silhouette that was both animal and disturbingly humanoid. I raised the gun, pointing it toward the movement. "Stay back!" A snarl was my only answer, followed by the splash of heavy footfalls crossing the shallow creek. I fired a shot blindly, the sound deafening in the confines of the ravine. There was a yelp, then silence. For a moment, I thought I'd scared it off. Then a rock clattered down from above. I looked up just in time to see it, a massive creature launching itself from the top of the ravine directly toward me. I fired again, but it was too late. The thing slammed into me with incredible force, knocking me to the ground. The gun flew from my hand, landing somewhere in the creek. I caught only glimpses as we struggled. Coarse, dark fur, powerful clawed limbs, a face that was a nightmarish blend of wolf and human, with intelligent eyes that burned with hatred. It was impossibly strong. One swipe of its claws tore through my jacket and into my shoulder, sending white-hot pain shooting through my body. I screamed, kicking and punching desperately, but it was like fighting a force of nature. In my panic, I remembered the hunting knife in my belt. I managed to pull it free and plunged it into the creature's side. It howled, a sound that began as animal but morphed into something almost human, a scream of rage and pain. The creature recoiled, giving me a moment to scramble away. I splashed through the creek, searching frantically for the gun. Behind me, the monster was recovering, pulling the knife from its flesh and casting it aside. My hand closed around the revolver, half buried in the creek bed. I whirled and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. At least one hit. The creature staggered, dark blood blooming on its chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, it looked at me with an expression that was terrifyingly human. Hatred, yes, but also a calculating intelligence. Then it turned and bounded up the ravine wall with supernatural agility, disappearing into the forest above. I stood there shaking, blood flowing freely from my shoulder. The gun had 1 bullet left. I needed to get out, to find help. But I was losing blood, and the path up the ravine suddenly seemed impossibly steep. Using my remaining strength, I pulled myself up, slipping on loose rocks, my injured shoulders screaming in protest. At the top, I collapsed, vision blurring. The bridge was only yards away. If I could make it across, I would be closer to the trail, closer to escape. I staggered to my feet and onto the bridge, the rusted metal swaying slightly under my weight. Halfway across, I heard it again, that growl now in front of me. The creature had circled around. It stood at the far end of the bridge, blocking my path to the trail. We faced each other across the expanse of weathered metal and rotting wood. Blood dripped from its side where I'd stabbed it, but it seemed unaffected. I raised the gun, knowing I had only 1 shot left. "What are you?" I found myself asking, though I knew it couldn't answer. But it tilted its head as if considering the question. Then it did something that froze my blood. It smiled, lips pulling back from yellowed fangs in a grotesque parody of human expression. It began to move toward me, walking upright now, a shambling gait that was neither fully animal nor human. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go except back the way I'd come, toward the ravine and the bone-filled cave. I aimed the gun at its head, my hand surprisingly steady despite everything. "Stay back," I warned, knowing it was futile. It kept coming. 10 yards away. 5. I could smell it now, that wet dog odor mixed with something rotten. It raised a clawed hand, almost casually, as if reaching out to caress my face. I fired. The bullet struck it directly between the eyes. Its head snapped back, body going rigid. For a moment it stood there swaying. Then it toppled backward, crashing onto the bridge with such force that the whole structure shuddered. I approached cautiously, not trusting that it was really dead. The creature lay motionless, blood pooling around its head. Up close it was even more horrifying, a patchwork of human and wolf, as if someone had tried to combine the two and failed horribly. Its limbs were disproportionately long, ending in hands that were almost human except for the vicious claws. The face was the worst, recognizably lupine, but with human eyes now glazed in death. I took out my camera with shaking hands and photographed it from every angle. No one could deny this evidence. This wasn't a bear or a wolf or any known animal. This was something else entirely. As I lowered my camera, I noticed something changing. The creature's fur seemed to be receding, its body contracting. Before my eyes, it was transforming. The snout shortened, the fur disappeared, the clawed hands became human. Within minutes, I was looking not at a monster, but at the body of a man. Middle-aged, naked, ordinary, except for the bullet hole in his forehead and the stab wound in his side. I staggered back, my mind refusing to process what I just witnessed. This couldn't be happening. Werewolves weren't real. They were myths, legends, horror movie monsters. Yet I had seen it, felt its claws tear into my flesh, watched it transform from beast to man. I was still standing there, trying to comprehend the impossible, when I heard voices and footsteps on the trail. A group of hikers had found us. What they saw was a wounded man standing over a dead body with a gun. Their faces registered shock, then fear. One of them was already calling 911. "It's not what it looks like," I tried to explain, but even to my own ears, the words sounded hollow. Within an hour, the bridge was swarming with police and paramedics. My shoulder was bandaged, and I was handcuffed despite my injuries. Sheriff Dalton looked at me with a mixture of disgust and resignation. "I told you to stick to the main trails," he said quietly as I was led to a police car. "You don't understand," I pleaded. "That thing, that man, he wasn't human. Not entirely. I have proof on my camera." But when an officer checked my camera, the memory card was missing. I remembered the creature's human-like intelligence, the calculating look in its eyes. Had it somehow taken the card during our struggle, or had someone else removed it afterward? I spent 3 days in a cell at the county jail before my lawyer managed to get me released on bail. The dead man was identified as Gerald Blackwood, a descendant of the family that had founded the mill and for whom the forest was named. He had lived alone in a cabin in the woods for decades, rarely coming into town. A recluse, people said. Harmless. The official story became that I had encountered Blackwood while trespassing on his property, and that I had shot him in a confrontation. My claims about werewolves and human remains were dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized mind, or as a calculated attempt to build an insanity defense. No one would go with me to look for the bones I'd found. The cave, when finally investigated weeks later, contained nothing but animal remains, according to the official report. The journal I'd found in the cabin mysteriously disappeared from evidence. Eric Chambers, the missing hiker whose wallet I'd found, was officially declared a victim of a hiking accident. His body never recovered. I returned to Columbus to await trial, but the charges were eventually dropped due to insufficient evidence. No weapon had been found on Blackwood's body, and my injuries suggested some form of struggle had taken place. The prosecutor's office announced they were satisfied that I had acted in self-defense. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The wounds on my shoulder healed, leaving 4 parallel scars that will never fade. A permanent reminder that what happened at Blackwood Bridge was real. I haven't returned to photography. I can't bring myself to go into the woods anymore, not even in broad daylight. I've moved to a small apartment in the city, where the constant noise of traffic and people keeps the silence at bay. Sometimes, on full moon nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear howling in the distance. It's just city sounds, I tell myself. Just the wind, or distant sirens, or my imagination. But deep down, I know better, because the most terrifying thought isn't that werewolves might be real. It's that Gerald Blackwood might not have been the only one. That somewhere out there, in the shadows of forgotten places like Blackwood Bridge, other creatures are waiting, watching, hunting. And sometimes when the moon is full and I catch my reflection in the mirror, I find myself checking my eyes for a hint of that inhuman intelligence I saw in the creature's gaze, because its blood mingled with mine that day in the ravine. And the most ancient legends say that's all it takes. So far, nothing has happened, but I keep the last silver bullet, the one I found rolling on the bridge after everything was over, on my nightstand, just in case.